Right, this is part 2 of setting up Mirror. In this part we're going to be creating a lobby so that we can have one server instance running multiple games at once in our card game. Right, so I've got this breakdown diagram here which will be available to you as well. This kind of just shows the points of entry, so what triggers off certain logic. So when you press the host button, we go down here, we host a game, we get a random match ID, and we want to use this random match ID because it's just going to be easier to get certain people to join rooms together, and rather than having a list of all the available rooms, since you'll most likely want to be playing these kind of card games, with a group of friends. Obviously that could be changed out for a list of matches, which would then have to be kept, I would say probably, no, well, the list could be kept on the server as well, and then just displayed, and then you could still join with the same code even. In this case, we're just going to enter a match ID and join, or click host and get a generated host ID to give to our friends. Right, so just some information on how this mind map works. We have the key of what information happens on the local player only, what happens on the other clients that are not the local player, what happens on the server, what is a client RPC, so information that's being taken from the server to all clients, and what is the target RPC, so client information that is coming from the server directly to local player client only. Okay, so we'll work through this and it'll become clearer by the end of it. So first things first, we need to create this little interface over here. And I'm just going to work with one of these at the moment, and then we'll test on multiple. Okay, so we're doing an extra scene first. This is going to be our lobby scene. And on our network manager in the offline scene, we're just going to assign lobby as our first scene. So basically, the lobby is going to manage connecting and hosting games, whilst the game scene will then be additively loaded on top of that to bring in any game logic and also game scene related stuff. So we're going to save that. We're going to go over to the lobby scene. I'm just going to change this color so that we can see that there is a difference. Okay, start off by just creating some basic UI here. Let's go with an image. And I've already got some sprites in here that I can use if it actually selects. Okay, and I need 2 halves. So I'm going to do that full, and then I'm just going to set the maximum here to 0.5. If I just change the color, you'll see now. Okay, so that's the bottom half, and we need another one for the top half, which is going to be from 0.5 to 1. Okay, so now we've got 2 halves there. Let's just rename that to top and bottom, and we can get rid of the image now. And also just going to add a separator in between there and set that to a height of 1 and change the color. So it just separates the 2 sections over there. Okay, so in the top half, according to our little image over here, we've got the input field for the match ID and the join button, and on the bottom we have the host button. So we're just going to add in the input field, and the button for joining over there, and at the bottom here, once I've styled that, I'm going to duplicate it. Okay, so holding in Control Alt and Shift, I'm just going to make it stretch the whole way first of all. Then I'm going to cut off the maximum there to 0.5 and give it a small padding. Well, let's say 30. Then on the button, do the same thing, but from 0.5 to 1 and 30 on the right. And let's do 15 on the left, and same here, 15 on the right. Okay, I'm going to change out this horrible sprite here to that one over there, and set it to 2. This pixel per multiply, you'll notice how it pushes the edges, basically. Okay, and then just change my text so I can actually see it. And that's going to be join. And actually the black is not really working for me. I'm going to do something a little more colorful. There we go. And I'm just going to change that as well to match. Something like that. Cool. And then enter the placeholder text. This is going to be enter match ID. Cool. And let's just make sure that our text color is, let's change that to the same color as our button there. Yep, that'll do just fine. And then the button we're going to duplicate, put that at the bottom, and then just center it in the middle, like so. And this is going to be host. Host, join, match. Cool. Maybe let's just, yeah, change that. Cool, and we can actually just reduce the height of this as well. There we go, much better. Yeah, let's keep it full white. Maybe give it a border. Change the color to that. 2. There we go, not so bad. Okay, and this is going to be our lobby UI, or the first part of it at least. So the second part of that is going to be this area over here. So it's basically the waiting area, the actual lobby. So when you host a game or join a game, your little avatar will be added in here. Okay, and then just clean up my scene over here. Yep, much better. Cool. Alright, so let's see. Our next section is we need to click on the host button, which will link directly to a UI lobby script. So we want to separate all our direct communication between UI. So any UI information will be interpreted through UI lobby so that we can avoid overloading the player script. So we can make the UI lobby script. Right, and in the UI lobby script, okay, we need a few public functions to receive those calls. So first of all, we want the public void host, and we also want the public void join. We also, because we're going to be using the UI, we need to add in the using UI namespace over there. We're going to need a reference to our input field, which is going to be our join match input, so that we can get the match ID over there in our join section. With host, we're going to need to create a match ID and then use that match ID to generate a new server, basically. Okay, so this host function is basically just going to pass it through to the player script, and then the player script is going to talk to the server to get a new game registered with the matchmaker. So the matchmaker will also be a script we need to create. So for now, let's just link up those two buttons quick and that one reference. Also, we just need to drop our script on there. So let's just drop the input field in there. Then on button here, this is just going to be join. Drop in the, nope, it's on that one. UI lobby join. And this one is the host button. There's the button. Same thing, drop the UI reference there and host. Okay. Okay, we have our three references. One thing we might want to do is just on the host, once we do host, we want to disable the interactivity of these buttons just so you can't spam it. In which case we'll need references to both of those buttons there. Okay, join button, host button. And if we host, then we can just do each one of those dot interactable equals false. And let's just do the same thing with join. With join, we'll add in some extra checks as well for if the join was actually a success or not. But as we press the button, it does need to turn those interactables off. The communication to the server will happen, and then we'll receive information about whether it was successful or not later on. Okay. So our UI is set up. Let's just drag those references in there. Join button and host button. There we go. Save the scene. Okay, now we're going to create our player script. And I already have one in this project, so I'm just going to wrap it in a little namespace here. Okay, wrapping in a namespace so that there aren't any conflicts with similarly named scripts. And I'm just going to add the same namespace to my other scripts as well, just so that they all exist in the same. Oops. Okay. Right. UI lobby, player, and auto connect, auto host client. Cool. So our UI lobby, when we host, we need to tell the player to actually begin hosting a game. So the player is the only direct communication to the server. The player has authority to speak to the server and issue commands. So we want everything to come through the player. So the UI lobby can tell the player what needs to happen based on UI interaction, but all communication back and forth between the server and the matchmaker is essentially a server only script. As you can see here, it's all red. And same as the turn manager, once we get into game logic, that would also be executing commands mainly on the server, and they're communicating with clients through the player script. So all communication between client and server happens through this player script directly. You could have other scripts on the same player prefab, but try not to confuse yourself by having multiple points of entry. Try and funnel everything down. So that's why I like having the UI lobby taking care of just inputs and outputs as well of results, and then having your player script taking care of the basics here, like hosting, joining, and beginning, as well as what happens when it joins another person's lobby. So this would happen if you are not the local host. So when another client connects to your game, this is what happens on that version. Right, okay, so we need to host the game. So we need a function in our player script to receive the host call from UI lobby. So we're going to do a public void host game. Okay, and we need our UI lobby needs to have a way of knowing who the player is. And because the player gets spawned in, we're not going to have any sort of direct reference available to us. So what we can do here is just have a little singleton for who the local player is. So we can do public static player local player. And then in the start function, we can just say if is local player. Oh, right. We need to first of all say using mirror, and we want to change out mono behavior here for a network behavior so that this script is networkable. Now we should have access to is local player, and if it is indeed the local player, then we want to just set our variable local player equals this. Okay, now we have access from anywhere to whoever our local player is by going player.localPlayer and then our function call, which is hosting a game. So now our UI is connected to our host game in player. So we click the host button, goes down to host game. Now we need to get a random match ID. So if you think about what the random ID is, it's a series, first of all, of 5 characters. It can be any letter and it can be any number. So we want to randomize that. And we're going to do that. Let's do that. To avoid cluttering up the player, let's do that on the matchmaker script. So we're going to create a matchmaker script. And once again, I'm going to add that same namespace. Okay, the matchmaker script is going to be a network script as well. So it's going to use mirror and it's going to be a network behavior. Okay, and in our matchmaker script, we're going to have a public static, and we want to return a string, and it's going to be get random match ID. Okay, and we're making it static so that we can just go matchmaker wherever you are, whoever you are, dot get random match ID, like so. Okay, and it's just going to be string match ID equals that. Okay, so that will then fill in our match ID for us there. Right, so the logic for the match ID. First of all, let's just set up a little string for whatever the ID is. So equals, and I'm just going to make it string.empty. Then we're going to do a for loop. We're going to go through 5 times because we want 5 digits. We're going to do, let's go an int random equals random dot range. Okay, and the range that we're going to look at is we're going to look at what is it, 24 characters or 26 characters. So 26 letters of the alphabet, plus we want 10 numbers as well, so from 0 to 9, including 0 as well. So let's do between 0 and 36. Right, so if the random number is below 26, that would mean that it's a letter. So underscore ID we'll just add, and this is going to be a char variable. We're basically converting a number into a char, and it's going to be random. And now we don't want the lowercase letter, we want the capital letter. So I've already looked at this beforehand, but we're just going to move it along by 65. So just adding 65 so that this starts at capital A, basically. Else our ID is just going to add random minus 26. Remember, we're going from 26 now to 36, but we want it to be 0, basically. So we just subtract 26 there, and we're going to convert that directly to a string. Okay, so that's going to run over 5 times, and eventually we're going to just log out here what our random is, and random match ID is underscore ID, and then let's just return that return ID. Okay, so that will generate a random match ID for us, quite simple, and it'll get us back to our host game in the player. Okay, so now that we have our match ID, we need to communicate with, well, let's just take a look here again. We get our random match ID. Now the next step is communicating on the server side of things. So this is going to be a CMD, a command. A command is then going to tell Matchmaker to register that match ID in a list of matches and add a player as a reference to that list. Right, so we need a command here. Command, and it's going to be, oh, it doesn't have to be public, that's for sure. It's just going to be void host game, and remember that a command always has to have a prefix of CMD. And we also want to be able to pass in that ID. So let's do that. And then we're just going to call our CMD host game over here with underscore match ID. Okay, remember that this comes from the UI. This comes, okay. Here we get a random match ID from the matchmaker. This is just a static method. We're just moving it in the matchmaker because it is more of a generalized purpose function. It doesn't need to be player specific. We may want to use this at a later stage somewhere else. It also just prevents clutter on the player script since we'll be having game logic in here at some stage. Right, so then we call cmd host game so that we can tell the server, look, we've got a match ID now, please register a new game and add this player to that list. So in our command host game, from there we need to communicate with the matchmaker. So in our matchmaker, let's add in a public void host game. Maybe this shouldn't be a void. Let's make this a bool so that we know if it was successful or not. So we can add some validation in here to tell maybe for the small chance that could possibly happen, a match ID was generated at exactly the same time and it was the same match ID. So there we can get around that just by having some simple validation there. Rather be safe than sorry. Right. Okay, so we have a public bool over here. Matchmaker should probably also have a singleton instance so that there will only ever be one matchmaker in the scene. So let's go and add that in, public static matchmaker instance, and let's just set that up in the start function. So instance equals this. Great. Now we've got access to matchmaker, the instance in our scene, and we've got access then to our host game function. So in our cmd host game, remember that this command means that now this function is running on the server's version of player. So on the server's version of player, we can say matchmaker.instance.hostGame. And because this is a bool, we want to actually wrap this whole thing in an if statement. So if it did manage to host the game, then we can carry on with life over here. And we can just say game hosted successfully, or move that, host game or game hosted failed. I mean, I could have said unsuccessfully, but it probably wouldn't have been a big enough difference to notice it in the console. So game hosted failed. I guess I could make the color all red and stuff as well, using color equals red. Let's do color equals green. Okay, so if it does manage to host, it'll be successful, otherwise it'll fail. And we can add some extra, we will need to add some extra logic in there just now. So in our host game, on our matchmaker, we need to create probably a class for what a match is. So a match needs a match ID and it needs player objects as well. So at the top over here, let's add in a public class match. Okay, and we'll just make this system.serializable. Also, it does need to be system.serializable if it will be network compatible. Okay, then we're going to have a public string for the match ID, and we're also going to have now we can do a public sync list of game objects. Game objects can be added to a sync list, but it'll basically reference the network instance ID to get that game object reference, which is cool. But in order to get a sync list game object, we actually need to generate what that sync list looks like. So we're going to do a public class of syncList game object, and it needs to inherit then from syncList, and we need to give it a type of game object. Okay, and this does need to be system.serializable once again so that it's networkable. Okay, so now we have a sync list of game objects, so we can add over here then a public sync list of game object, call it players. And we can also just list, maybe go equals new sync list game object. So we just initialize that to an empty list when the class gets created. Right, then when we do create a new list, maybe let's create a constructor that takes in the match ID and also then the game object, which is the first player, basically the host, the person who began this whole match, right? And then let's just say this dot match ID equals match ID, and also players dot add player. So we just add the player directly to that list. Okay. So now I'm going to save that. Oh, well, actually, this isn't going to work up here. What would happen over here with this class, it's going to complain that it cannot be serialized because it doesn't have a default constructor. So we do need to add just a default match and give it nothing over there. It just needs a blank constructor, and then the the network weaver will be happy to take this. Okay, so we have our match data, we have our game object, syncless game object being used in there. Now, the only other piece of data that we're probably going to need is a sync list for all the matches that are currently going on, because there'll be more than one match going on. So we can actually just duplicate that line there, and instead of it being game object, it's going to be match. So it's going to inherit the match class that we've just created, and it's going to use syncList as its inheritor. So it inherits from syncList so that Mirror knows how to serialize this data over the network, and it's going to be of type match data. So now in here, we could have a public list, a public sync list of match called matches. And let's just make it equal a new empty list. Right, okay, so now back to host game. We need to give it a match ID here. So we have this match ID, but we're not actually giving it over to MatchMaker to go and create that. If we look at our match data, we want an ID, but we also want the player reference, so the reference to that game object, right? So we're going to need to put two pieces of information in here, one being the match ID and the other being game object, being this player's game object. Let's go back to our host game over here and match it all up. Okay, so now we have matching data, matching parameters over there. So we're given the match ID, we're given our player object. Now we need to create a new match and we need to put it in there. First of all, we also need to do some validation probably, but let's maybe add that in just now. So when we host the match, let's do matches dot add, and we're going to say a new match, and it takes in the ID like we've got there and the player. Like so. Okay, so that's going to add a brand new match to matches. What we could do is have a list of just the IDs so that we could reference that list and see if there's already an existing ID. So maybe let's do that. Let's do a sync list of a sync list string. So public, and there might be a, yep, okay, so sync list string, int, float, bool, basic types already exist in Mirror, so we don't have to go and do this part again. And let's call that match IDs equals new sync list string, like so. So we can also then use if match IDs dot contains the match ID, and we're going to say if it doesn't contain it, then fantastic, let's add match IDs dot add and create a new match. Else return false, and let's just do a little log over here for match ID already exists. Match generated. Okay, and then we also over here we need to return true. Okay, so it adds the match ID to our list of strings so that we can easily check that list of strings if the match already exists. So that's a quick validation method. And then we add the new match, taking in our match ID and our player. We just give a little log. And if it doesn't work out, then we're going to just say that the match already exists. Coming back to our player script. So this is happening on the server here. The server checks the matchmaker. It asks to host a game. The host game returns true or false. If the game was successfully hosted, we want to do something, and if it failed, we want to do something. Okay. So if it was successful, then we need to modify a particular component. So we host the game, we register the match and player. We've done that now. We come back over here. We need to then spawn the UI prefab. But one thing I forgot to add into this is we need to do the match ID to GUID. Okay, so Mirror's got this handy little component that we're going to add to our player prefab here. And this is called the network match checker. So the network match checker has a match ID over here. It's a GUID. So GUID is like a 13-digit, I believe, code with dashes in it. So it's a unique identifier that basically, if any network object has the matching identifier, Mirror will only synchronize those objects together. So Mirror does this all for us. All we have to do is assign that GUID. So what we can do is take our 5-digit match ID, generate a GUID from that, and just make sure that all network objects that we want to include in our specific lobby have that matching GUID. So don't overthink it. It's quite simple. And also we need to add our player script here. Okay, let me just drag that one in. Player. In our lobby we need the matchmaker. Added our matchmaker. See, it's already added our network identity for us automatically as well. We have our 2 sync lists over here. With the matchmaker, I'm going to turn the sync interval down to 0. So basically, any change that happens will be immediate, but it won't repeat endlessly because Mirror is smart enough to know when data has changed and only synchronize those changes. So that's great for us. On player, we're also going to just change the sync interval for the network match checker to 0 as well. Okay, so we have our matchmaker, we have our player. Am I forgetting something here? We need, and that is communicate. Yeah, okay, so that should be fine. So we can reference our network matchmaker over here. Oh, our network match checker, my bad. And let's just get it in the start. All right. We actually need this to happen regardless of if it's local player or not. So I'm just going to put that there. So that happens in the start. Then when we receive the all clear, we need to take network match checker dot match ID, and we need to set it. And now we need to convert match ID to, well, this match ID over here to a GUID. And this isn't a default method, we're going to have to create one. So we're going to create a little extension method that can convert this 5-digit string or 5-character string into a GUID for us. And we're going to do that on, let's add it on the matchmaker, but we're going to make a public static class called match extensions. And we're going to do a public static GUID to GUID. Okay, and GUID, if you click on it, click the light bulb. We want to use using system there for that. And we need some parameters in here. So we're going to take in this being the string called ID. Okay, so now in order to convert this to a GUID, we need to use something called the MD5 crypto service provider. Okay, and if we click on it, we can get the using security cryptography. We'll call that provider, and it's going to equal a new provider. So we just create a new instance of that, right? Okay, then yeah, and you should probably just copy this section word for word since it's not going to change. And encoding dot default dot get bytes. Okay, and encoding again needs another namespace using system.text. And then we need another byte array for hash bytes. And hash bytes. And that's going to be the provider dot compute hash input bytes. And then we're just going to return the new GUID based on hash bytes. Okay. So don't dig too deep into this. Copy it, paste it, go. This will just convert a 5-digit string into a GUID predictively. So every time you put in the same string, you'll get the same GUID. Okay, so now our extension works because it's a public static extension, meaning it's basically globally accessible, and we're using the this keyword, so we're referring to this is the string that we want to then use, and this is the extension method that is used or applied to this string. Okay, so now we have the match ID being set on the network match checker. And let's say, I think the only thing left to do there is to notify the UI whether it was successful or not. So remember here we've made this inactive. If it did fail, we need to actually set that back to true so we can try again. So let's put in a public void host success. And the same thing over here, a public void join success. And if it was successful, so let's go if success else. And if it wasn't, then let's just enable all of that again. Just set it all back to true so we can try again. Okay, now host success needs to be called from somewhere as well. But this, okay, so this is a command. We need to actually target the client again to tell the client whether, and then the client can communicate with the UI. So let's do a target RPC, void target host game. And I find it's just easier to manage if you start off with a name of a function, you have the CMD variant, the target variant, or the client RPC variant. Just makes more sense. Okay, so if we did manage to successfully host a game, we want target to know if it was successful first of all, so let's do a bool success, and then let's also give it the match ID that we've been passing around, so that over here, if it was successful, and let's see over here, yeah, target host game, and it's going to be true, and the match ID is going to be match ID, and over here it's going to be false. Cool. Okay, now in the target then, we want to be able to tell the UI lobby that it was successful or not. Since there's only ever going to be one of these UI lobbies, let's make this a singleton as well. And don't forget to set this instance in the there we go. Instance is this. Okay, that way here we can say UI lobby.instance.host success and give it the success variable that's come through there. Oh, it might actually need this match ID. Or I suppose we can get that from local player. If we get that from local player, we will need to have a public one here then. Let's do public string match ID. And maybe let's just make this a sync var, because then this will be displayed on all versions of this client. Then let's set it over here. Go match ID equals underscore match ID. And actually this should just be a small letter M. Okay, match ID there. Okay, so that'll be set over there, which means that by the time it comes through here, it should also be set, because we're updating it over there. Then it's being called. It should be set immediately. Maybe let's just log it out just in case. Yep. Yeah, we'll just test that out. It should be fine. Okay, then UI lobby is going to get the host success. It's going to get that call over there. If it was successful, then we need to switch over to the lobby UI. So we need another reference over here. And that's going to be, what should we do? Let's make it a canvas. And yeah, that one can just overlay the other one. That should be fine. So we just enable the canvas on the lobby there. Random. Let's do Unity engine dot random. Okay, and we get no errors. All good. Okay, now matchmaker is all fine. This, we need to have another lobby here. So we've got the connect. Let's add, oops, not a raw image. The image, it's going to be, it's going to be bigger. So it's going to cover over connect basically. So we wouldn't be able to then click any of those buttons in there, so that's fine. Okay, so this is going to be the actual lobby, and let's add the canvas element to this. Because we add the canvas, we also need a graphic raycaster if we want to actually enable interact with it, any of the elements. And then on here, just assign canvas in there and turn it off by default. Okay. I think we might be ready to test. So in order to test, let's go back to the offline scene, run it. We're going to host a local server. Lobby hasn't been added, right. Go to the build settings and add the lobby as index 1. Okay. Did I add player twice? Okay, it needed to wait for that to finish. It was trying to connect to its own self. Which actually means that in our offline scene, let's just delay that animation a little bit more so that we can't possibly do that. Hopefully that is enough. Yep, okay. That should prevent it. Cool, then the host button does not work. Why? Do I have something blocking? Host button, canvas is fine. Interactable. Oh, that's in the offline, hold on. Tweaking the wrong one here. Lobby. Canvas is fine. Just turn off raycast on that one. Scott join. Host has host. No, something is blocking. Or are these buttons, they are interactable. That is odd. The event system is there. And why would the other ones work and not this one? Just gonna add in a random button. Okay, that one can press. And if it were above lobby, yeah. Still pressable. Still works. Okay, now it doesn't. So why? And now it doesn't press there either. Is it the border? Yep, I think it was the border. Ha. Okay, it was the border. And that we can just move to the top there. Okay, that solves that issue. Let's test it again from offline. host. Okay, we got the match ID. The match ID does match. That color tag didn't work. I think the spaces are probably... Okay, we have a match generator. So if we look at MatchMaker, you can see we have the match ID there and we have the match. The sync list won't show the data over here, but we can see that it is there, just not the particulars of it. And if we find our player gets that GUID, which wasn't there before, and it has the match ID on the player script. I thought I changed, player should change that, yeah. Cool, okay, let's see what's next. Okay, we need to do the join as well. So when we join over here, let's follow the same pattern over here. We have a join game on the player. So let's duplicate all of that. And then all the host keywords here, change it to join. Okay, and then matchmaker needs a join as well. And yes, it can be a bool. So we're going to join using a match ID and a player, but instead of adding a new match, we need to find the existing match and join up on that one. So we can check that if it does indeed contain the match, then let's say match joined and match ID does not exist. Okay, then we're not going to add a new match, we're just going to add ourselves to that match. So we do need to do a for loop, and we're going to go through the length of matches. And we're going to find if matches I dot match ID equals our match ID, then we found it, so we can break from that loop once we do find it. And then we're going to go matches I dot players dot add, and we're going to add our player. And because we did that, we can then return true. I think that is it for the joining part of it. Yeah, I think that is fine. Okay, then we return true to our caller, which is this. And then we can say target join game. And with our target, we've got join success, match ID, it's the same. What we do want to do is then spawn in the player icon. But we'll get there. Right now we can just make it do the same thing as the host. Okay, now for this one we're going to need to test with 2 clients. So let's just run that. Let's let that compile there. Okay, we're going to host a local server and we're going to host a game. We know there's our match ID. Let's reload that scene, fine. Now this one should, the same story. Just add our lobby scene in there. This one should auto connect to the server. Yep, there we go. Now our match ID, let's go PH4OY. Okay, now we don't get any response there, so we need to actually just check up on our fail. We haven't actually done anything with our join. Player.localplayer.joinGame. Okay. Then we just need to sync that up again. Cool, run it. Host joins host this game. And is that an I or an L? Let's go with I. Oh geez, and then it's an O, and then a 0, and then an 8. Okay, so that one failed. Let's, I think we need to do it all capitals. 3008. Failed. So maybe it is an L. L3008. Failed. Okay, maybe let's just run that one again because that code was terrible. Okay, that's much easier to read. Join the local. LUU2F. Oh, we're not giving it the match ID from there, we're generating a new one. Right. Small oversight. We were getting a random ID instead of passing one in from here. So we need the ID from the input field, which is join match input dot text. Copy that over, run it. Okay. Okay, now it's WGT4X join. Okay, there we go. Now we have it joining the same exact scene there. Okay, so we've got the client and server connecting happily now. What we do want to do is have some kind of representation of each of the players in the lobby, and then we also need the ability to begin the game. So if we just look over what's going on again over here, we've got the host, we've done that. We have not done the spawn UI player. So this is what we're going to do next, is spawn that UI player. On the join, we've got clicking the join button. We do validate the ID, and if it succeeds, we join the game. We haven't shown an error just yet. So we join the game, we go to join the game with the ID. That goes over to finding the match. It does that. It adds the player to the match. It returns the bool, and if it was a success, which it is, okay, we need to do that part. Changing the match ID. So let's just check. Okay, we do. We do change, get that match ID, set it over here, and then we do set the match checker as well. So that is all good. And then we join the game, yes, and we need to spawn that UI prefab once more. Okay, so the host and the join have basically come up to this exact same point here where we need to spawn that UI prefab. And we are showing the lobby UI. Okay, so we can go back to our lobby. And under here, let's add another image in here. Set it to that one, make it 2. Okay, and I'm just gonna slightly offset the color and then add some padding and a little bit bigger at the bottom because I want the players to line up over here, and then the begin game and the match ID as well there. Okay, so in here, let's make this players, and this is going to be a grid layout group of, I'm just going to put in, so that would be 10 players. Nope, 90, no, 60. Yeah, that's okay, because then we're going to add some extra padding there. Just about right. Pretty good. And then the spacing on the X could be slightly bigger. Yeah, I guess that works out. And then we can add another 2. So we could have a 12-player game essentially here. Right, so get rid of the rest of them. This is going to become my player UI, or what's it? UI player. And I'm just going to drop that in there. Okay, I'm going to use the same. Cool, make it 3. And add in a little image in it. This is going to be something like the player portrait. Let's see. I know I've got an image in here somewhere. If this UI would behave. Oh, that's so annoying. There we go. Okay, let's just use that one, I guess. Scale it up the whole way. 15. Okay, and then we could also just add in maybe some text. And just say player 1. And maybe just add a little nameplate behind it. That's going to be height of 30. Do something like that. And maybe just push it down a little bit, like that. Put the text in there. Set that to bold maybe. And make that best fit text so that it just fits in there nicely. Make it a bit bigger. Maybe that. And then that means at the bottom here. And then set that to preserve. Yeah, maybe like that, and then give it a little shadow. And this guy can get a shadow as well. Yeah, something like that. Fine. This one, yeah, it's a bit better. Yep, that'll do. Apply that. Okay, now our UI player, we would want to set this text as well. So if there were a player name, we could make this player 1 or whoever their name is, or we could also just say player 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. and shuffle that order up so that our game has a random ordering. So let's go and add a UI player script. Drop this on there, and in here we want to use Unity Engine.ui, and we want to have a serialize field for a text, and then we want to have a public void set player, and then we would have maybe a player. So player referring to the player script, so that if we have a direct reference to that player script, then we can, get all sorts of information from it. So let's go this dot player equals player, and then we go text dot text equals, and now we need to get some information from here. So for instance, let's just say player like so. For now, we want to add in a player index over here. So what we could do is on our player have a player index sync var. So sync var public int player index. So this would be the player index in relation to all the other players in the game. So when we host a game, that player index is going to immediately be 0. And we can get that from where we add the player. So where should we put this? In MatchMaker. So when we host a game, we could also maybe out int player index and do the same for join game. So if we basically can put in a reference to a variable wherever this gets called and then populate the information from in here. So here we're going to say player index, equals, and now we want to know the index of this, which in this case will be 0. And over here it's going to be that dot count minus 1, because it'll be the last one that's added into that list at that exact point. Okay, it's complaining about player index must be assigned before. So let's just go here and say player index equals -1. So if it's -1, we know there's an issue. If the match ID doesn't exist, yeah, it should stay -1, that's fine. And if it was successful, it's going to be player 0 or player whatever gets added there. Cool. In our player script now, we can say out, and we're going to out to player index directly. So we're outing directly to this variable over here, which is already a sync var. So this gets called on the server, it outputs to that. Because this variable was updated, it'll tell all clients that that variable was updated and be on its merry way. Same thing for the join. Now in our UI player, we could say plus player dot player index. No, was player index public? This script is not within the same namespace. Need to make sure it's in the same namespace in order to access whatever player is. Okay, so now we should get player 0, player, and maybe we should increase that by 1, so it starts at player 1, not at player 0. So we can do that in our matchmaker. And then I guess count would work. And instead of it being 0, it's going to be 1. Okay, assign text. Let's apply all those overrides. And let's delete that one. Now, our UI lobby script needs to be able to spawn that prefab into here on success. So let's first of all give this a header over here and just call this host join, and then do another section for lobby, so for all our lobby references. And we need a transform that we can spawn into, so this is going to be lobby or UI player prefab or player parent and prefab, which is going to be a game object. So when we host, we need to, on success over here, we're going to spawn that player prefab. So let's do a void spawn and just go game object and instantiate it. And we're just doing a regular instantiate here. Basically, we'll need to call the spawn player prefab from 3 different places. So when we host, we add ourselves there. When we join, we also then need to spawn in the other ones, which will come from the player as a start function. Now, I'm probably confusing you now. Let's see, we need to spawn that prefab, and we need to spawn it at the parent. Then we need to UI player dot get component, and we need to get the UI player component from that. we need to set a player here. So let's give it that player there. Right, so when it joins, let's do the spawn player UI prefab. And we're going to do first of all the local player. So we can use player.local player. Same, we can do that for our host. And then the third one, if we look at this, remember we've got 3 instances of spawning this UI player. So one from the host, one from the game, which we have done, and the last one needs to come from the not local player. So we can do that on start under else, and the else part is going to be through UI lobby, and I suppose that would need to be public then. And we're going to spawn this prefab according to this. Okay, so basically when another player suddenly joins your lobby, this start function gets going again. And because it's not the local player, it'll trigger this off over here. And it's probably just a good idea to make sure that that happens first, just in case. Yeah, I think that is it. Apart from, oh yeah, no, that will be correct. Okay, so we need to add in the parent, the prefab, and then we need to make sure we turn off lobby again. And we need to sync toy this. And let the other one compile. Go back to our offline scene. Host a local server, host a local game. Game hosted, but didn't show. Did I turn off the whole object? Yep, I did. I turned off the whole object instead of the canvas. Copy that again. Okay, host. Yay, we got player 1 is in there. Okay, we should be able to join automatically. Oh, because this is the server. So basically the server will show everyone even if it doesn't have the ID. So in an environment where you have a standalone server, a server only, that should actually work just fine. But we can still look at the client over here. So it is D0LLI. Yes. Okay, so now we got player 0, player 1. Fantastic. Okay, seems to be working all right there. One thing is if you input lowercase information, it's probably not going to match up there. So we can fix that on our join here. Dot to upper. So it'll just convert all that text to uppercase for you. That should work out fine. Okay, now what we do want to do is display our lobby match ID as well, which we can do, yeah, on lobby. Let's add a text element over here, and pop it at the bottom right here. Make it right aligned. Okay, the height is going to be 90 because that was the height difference over here. And let's go minus 30 so that it lines up nicely there. And just let's put in a random number. And let's say match ID. Let's make it bold. Let's do it that way. Or maybe let's do two, one for the title and one for the actual ID. Then it would be 45 and 45, but this one is the ID and that's the title, so title would go up by 45. That would be on the lower end, this will be on the upper end, and then title can be smaller and ID can be a bit bigger, and then we can just shift these two items up. Yeah, something like that looks nice. And then this one can just go gray. Okay, so now we know what the ID is. We need our lobby scripts to assign that ID. And that will be here. Match ID text. So then when the hosting is successful or the joining is successful, we can say .text equals and then let's use player.localPlayer.match ID. And then on the join success, same story. Right there. Okay, and the only other thing that is still missing here, we haven't shown an error and we don't have the begin game button to then additively load our game scene. So let's add a little button in here. Change the sprite out if it'll let me. Ha, there we go. Okay, so we have our begin game button. And that needs to link up to the lobby UI scripts. And we need to have a public void for begin game. And begin game needs to communicate to player to start that game. And we also only need to show that button if it is the hoster. So here we can go serialize field, button, or I suppose we can just make this a game object, since we'll just be setting it active and inactive. Begin game button. So if it is host success, then begin game button dot set active true, and begin game button will come through here. So we need another series of these. Okay, and everywhere it's join, we're just going to change this for begin. Okay, so yes, we need the begin game. We don't need the match ID in this case. When it goes over to the server, let's just check the diagram again. So begin game tells server to begin game. On the matchmaker begin game instantiates the turn manager prefab. It sets the ID on that network checker for the turn manager and adds the player to the turn manager, and then turn manager has all the players, sends a target RPC back to that player to load the game additively. But that shouldn't actually be, that should be blue, that should be the client RPC to load the game additively. That shouldn't be a target RPC. I will adjust. Okay, so yes, we don't need any information passed in there. And the begin game is just, yeah, it doesn't need an if statement either over here. So we would just do matchmaker dot instance, and our matchmaker needs the public void begin game. Okay, so we begin the game, game beginning, and then target. We don't need a success and we don't need a match ID. And it's actually not going to be a target, it's going to be a RPC. Client RPC, RPC begin game, match ID. And we don't need to tell the UI lobby that it happened, we just need to additively load game scene, which we'll get back to very shortly. Let's just finish this part over here. So it's going to be player dot local player dot begin game. That comes in here, tells this the server on the matchmaker to begin the game. So over here, we need to spawn in our turn manager. Okay, so we need a turn manager. Matchmaker, save that. Okay, so turn manager basically controls the state of the game in a card game. So it's basically the turn-based manager. It'll manage who the players are, whose turn it is, what happens when cards are played, what happens when the game is played. So this is basically your overall game state, whereas your player controls your local player's game state. So um, the player will communicate with turn manager to place cards or pull cards, etc. Okay, so we need a network identity on this. Oops. And we also need another script now for turn manager. Drop turn manager on there. What? This turn manager needs its namespace as well, since I've got one in here already. I can just copy it from here. And in here, we're going to say using mirror, change this to a network behavior. And let's maybe do a public void add player. And just give it player. And we can do something more with this at a later stage. Okay, so our matchmaker is going to need a serialized field for turn manager prefab, which is a game object. So that when the game does indeed begin, we can go game object new turn manager equals instantiate turn manager prefab as is. Then we need to okay, so maybe we do need to actually set the ID in here. We're gonna have to, because we need to convert it to a GUID and set it on new turn manager dot get component network checker dot match ID equals match ID dot to GUID, like so. So that this network manager or this turn manager only applies to the players that have that matching GUID, which means here in player we need to set this to match ID. Simple. Okay, and then likewise when we need the turn manager. Let's set this as awake. Maybe we should give the turn manager's reference over to player. Okay, let's add a list over here. And it can actually be a list of player, since the turn manager wouldn't need to synchronize this list. It just needs to be on the server because all the logic will be happening on the server only. So let's make a list of players over here, and then we can just go players.add underscore player. And instead of calling this RPC, and since this RPC is just going to be additively loading the scene, this does actually need to be, it shouldn't be a RPC, it should be a target. Because you would want to target just that player and tell just that player to load the scene. You don't want all the players loading all the scenes on all the clients. That doesn't make sense. Okay, so with this we also want to say using Unity Engine dot scene management, and it's going to be scene manager dot load scene, and we're loading scene 2, and we're going to do load scene mode dot additive. It's just going to load scene 2 additively on top of the lobby. So we'll just make sure that our so we have some UI maybe that just covers up the lobby scene there. It just makes it quite seamless then going between game and lobby again. Okay, so this target over here, we're not going to call this from inside this function, but rather have a public void begin game, or rather start game, and this is going to move into there, and I'll show you why in a moment. Because in our matchmaker we already have access to all our player game objects because they're stored in the match. So we need to find the matching match first of all. So for each, or for matches dot count, if matches I dot id is equal to underscore match id, then we have found the match and we can break from that loop. Then what we want to do is go through all the players in the match and tell all those players to start their games. So we're going to say, let's do a for each statement here. For each player in matches I dot players, then we're going to go player dot, or player is just a game object actually, so we need to get the oh gosh, try again. And it's going to equal player dot get components player, and then underscore player dot start game. Okay, so that'll call the start game over there. What we also need to do is tell turn manager, which is, I guess let's create a reference here for turn manager. Equals that. And then over here we can say turn manager dot match ID. What you complaining about? Oh, network checker. My bad. There we go. Equals new turn manager dot get component turn manager. There we go. Okay, now in here We can say turn manager dot add player, and we're going to add underscore player. Okay, so turn manager has a list of all its players now. We tell each one of those players on the server to run their start game functions. From the server, the target begin game will be run, so basically once per client on the local player, and it'll additively load that scene in. Fantastic. Okay, we need to make sure our turn manager has the, don't know if that's the one, drag that one. It needs to also have the network checker, network match checker, and let's set that to 0. Okay, we need to make a prefab of turn manager, and then we need to assign that in here, turn manager prefab. Save the scene. This begin game, turn it, well, we need to assign the function there. Begin game, turn it off to begin with. Turn the lobby canvas off. Save that and run the sync toy. Okay, go back to the offline scene. Run that. Cool. Host local server. Run that. Okay, we host a AS23G. No, haven't assigned that text element. Lobby. Match ID goes to that one, and begin game button goes to that one. Make sure you assign everything. Run it again. Okay. Okay, cool. No errors. And yes, we do have our correct ID there. So now if we go 0MY5B, join. Okay, we got player 0 and 1. And if we go begin game, we have loaded into that scene on both of them. Fantastic. Okay, so because it's an additive scene, our game scene does not need a camera. And then we should probably just add some UI that will sit on top. So on our canvas, we can set the sort order to 1 just so that it sits right on top of any other UI. And let's just maybe change that color so we know that we're in the game scene. Run that. Cool. And go to the offline. Host local. Host that. LDXTT. Yes. So on here, the match ID doesn't get set. Interesting. Begin game. We are in there, and we are in there. Okay, so what's going on here, we haven't assigned turn manager as a spawnable item prefab. So we need to make sure we drag the turn manager into that slot. And just double check, yes, everything's fine. Let's just rerun that. Host. Okay, and that's going to be 7ZI30. Yep. Okay, we have game scene. We have a turn manager as well. Oh, we didn't network spawn the turn manager. Okay, so basically the turn manager only exists on the server in that one. Over here, after we instantiate, we need to tell turn manager to spawn on the server. So network server dot spawn and spawn it. So that'll spawn it on all clients then. So let's just run that again. And we go B3A76 join begin game. Okay, we have our turn manager there, and we have our turn manager. Fantastic. Okay, so now we can clearly see we've got players and turn manager. So let's do a deployment. Also, actually, I just want to look into why match ID text on join success is not correct. Because local player hasn't received that, I suppose. Well, maybe let's just add it in here then. Like that. And maybe let's just say match ID equals underscore match ID. I didn't save this. Okay, and we've got x7vhh. We join, and there we go. We do have x7vhh. Great. And then begin game, and beginning game. There we go. Okay, I think that is fine. We can deploy this now. I'm just going to do Windows builds for this. One being the server. Let's build that. And it's going to be just then we're going to just run multiple clients and test that we can have multiple rooms open at the same time and that we aren't seeing any other bugs or glitches. That was a quick build. And then let's also build one without server build here for the clients. So by doing it this way, the only difference in building is that little checkbox of server build, because Mirror will start the headless build as a server only, and we should be able to join the local build easily enough. Okay, so let's go back to the server, launch the server, We see the headless build going off nicely there. We launch a client, immediately we get the correct lobby. Okay, and I'm going to launch 4 of them here. Okay, so I'm going to do these 2 in a room and these 2 in a room. So let's host 1 there. And now we didn't get a match ID. Why did we not get a match ID? I suppose I didn't actually test that hosting from a client. Okay. That's why you gotta test these things. Okay, so testing from a client, hosting from a client, the match ID that was given to UI lobby was not up to date. So same story as here. We need to include that there. And just make it equal that. Okay, it seems like the match ID wasn't up to date at that exact point in time. So let's just add that one there and also just include that there. See, I think the CMD, we updated the sync var there, but then target was called immediately and the sync var wasn't given a chance to update in order before. So we're just going to basically force it. And let's just test that locally. Run. Okay. And if we host a game, okay, cool. We are getting a code now. Great stuff. Yeah, so we should be able to build safely. And then build the server as well. Okay, server up and going. Client 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, host 1 there, join 1 here. 706NW, join. Okay. Okay, so there's a discrepancy in the player index there, but that's a minor glitch. 5JNJK. Okay, point is we have 2 over there and 2 over here. And if we begin the game, that happens there, and we begin the game, and this happens here. We have multiple games running on one single server instance. Lobby success. Okay, that player ID issue, that comes down to, where's this adding the player there? The player ID comes from here, the player index. Which is set by host game. Player index is 1. And player index is matches iPlayers.count. Wait, that was player 2 though. I think it was just, was it just backwards? Oh, it went to player 0, not to player 1. I think the index wasn't set before UI was trying to write it. Yeah, you see it's the same issue there. So where we call set player, spawn the prefab, it outs the player index right there. I guess we can just add here player index and include it in the in join success and in host success. Which means in UI player we also need to set it, well, no, we don't need to do it there. We just need to make sure that player index does indeed match. This outs on the command. So let's pass it through with the target RPC then. That is right. To make sure that we do update player index. Okay, that should be better. And over here as well. Okay, so same story. The sync var was being updated on the server, then immediately we called the target RPC in the same line, or in the same function, same update, and the data wasn't at the client just yet, but we were trying to use it immediately. So in this case, we needed to just pass it through with the target RPC and just make sure that the local one is updated to the correct value before the sync var then catches up eventually. Okay, that should do it. Then we should get player 1s instead of player 0s. Okay, server's built. Run server. Client is built. Okay, player 1 R8H5J. Join player 2. Great. Player 1, player 2. So the reason for this ordering issue as well is because your local client obviously spawned first and then the others all caught up. So we can fix that by just setting the sibling index on UI lobby, where we instantiate a new one. We then set the player. So we can also just say new UI player dot set dot transform dot set sibling index, and we're going to set it according to player dot player index -1, because that player index starts at 1 and we want it to then be 0 and so on. Okay. It's nicer to test with desktop builds than trying to do a web and a WebGL build and a Linux server build every time, because of these small little glitches that you want to go back and fix, and then at least this iteration time is a lot less. Okay, run server, run clients. Okay, host on that one, join on this one, 6LLSH, 1, 2, 1, 2. There we go. Okay, success. And let's see if we launch another client. And it was, what, 6LLSH. Join that, 1, 2, 3. Fantastic. Begin game. All 3 are red. Great stuff. Okay, that concludes this tutorial of integrating a full lobby and game instance management. So the rest would be up to you of integrating your game logic into turn manager and into the player script as well, and any other fancies you want to add to the lobby. Cheers.